Shabbat Shalom, and welcome back to Living Waters, Falling Deeper in Love with God's Word. I'm one of your hosts, Lauren Cruz.
And I am Stephanie Pavlantos. Thank you for joining us, and welcome back, Lauren.
We're back together. I know it's been a couple of weeks.
I know. We actually went like 2 weeks where we weren't on the show at the same time.
I know. But that's okay. We've been busy and life happens and everything, all of the things.
Yeah. So, well, it was actually 3 weeks because...
Oh, you're right.
Because you did it alone because I got the call my mom was actively dying.
Right.
And got up and drove to where she lives. And then the next week was the funeral. Mm-hmm. So then you did it. You had Sarah on. So
I did. And I think that went pretty well. And she and I have connected a little bit over Facebook and everything. And she's a sweet person, very sweet. So
and a very active website, Facebook.
I have enjoyed her Facebook memes, and I'm learning a lot from her. And then even from her, there's another woman that was, I guess they were friends because she was resharing some things, and so I'm following her now too. And there's such a great community of whole Bible believers, mm-hmm. and to varying degrees. Some people are just starting, and some people are out there. So. They're solid and they do all the things. And I think it's interesting as you learn, you kind of, like I've come to a lot of things on my own just through study that I think Holy Spirit is talking to me about it. And then when I see other people coming up with the same conclusions, I feel very confirmed. So it's good. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody about that very thing.
Really?
And it's, I mean, you don't want to be the one who is the only one that has the idea or the only one, because the Lord,
right.
Witnesses. So,
Well, and test the knowledge of what you're learning. And I don't want to be wrong. I want to rightly divide it. So,
right.
Yeah.
So it takes some studying, but it also is great when there's people who want to help and just, even on, they're not coming alongside you necessarily, but they're putting it out there for you to read and to find. So that's and she's very good writer. I believe she explains things very, very detailed and very well.
Yeah.
And then she makes a lot of her own graphics, and they're just beautiful. So
yeah, I had shared one thing from her. And oh my gosh, it opened up the floodgates. And I actually ended up deleting it because I don't mind sharing. I'll share my faith on every platform. I'll answer questions and have dialogue with you. But when you start getting ugly and you're trying to proselytize me back to your thinking, I'm not going to fight with you about it, and I'll just delete the thing.
Yeah, there was one thing I think was it on food, dietary laws?
It was. Like how Christians will say, I'm not under the law because I don't have to eat food, but then they'll use Leviticus to argue with you about homosexuality lifestyle or something. And so I had a ton of responses to that, and how you're not under the law, and Jesus was talking about washing his hands and pronounced everything clean, and and so if anything, when they post things like that, I go straight back to the Bible and I read it, and I'm like, I'm not getting that from you. I don't get that same theology anymore now. When I read through some of those things, I can see it, and I can go, no, he's talking about washing his hands or
and that's what I like about the book we're using, just as a caveat there, but because he actually puts Torah in when Paul is talking about Torah. And he doesn't put it in when Paul's not talking about Torah. So if he's talking about the law of sin and death, he doesn't call it Torah. If he's talking about the works of the law, which are more rabbinical works, traditions, then he puts it as
traditions. Yeah, he'll say
traditions are works of the law. He explains that. But where he's actually talking about Torah, he puts Torah, the word Torah, in there.
With a capital T, right?
Yeah. And we don't have that in our regular Bibles. Everything's just law. But Paul's talking about 2, 3, maybe even 4 different kinds of law.
Yeah, and there's law that applies to the priests. There's law that apply to women. There's law that apply to men.
Rabbinical. Yeah. Adam, the law of sin and death that came through Adam.
Yeah.
There's just so many things that it's not all Torah. But
well, the other thing too, I get a kick out of, because there is a verse in Mark, in the book of Mark, and it says, and Jesus proclaimed all foods clean. Right. It's in parentheses and it's bracketed, which I was always taught, if that's the case, it's not in the original. That was added. And so I went and looked it up in Andrew's book, because I have the other ones too. And he has a whole footnote about how it's not in the original manuscripts, and it goes, and I'm like, okay, why do we forget that when we're reading the Bible, that something in italics is not in the original script?
Oh yeah, and get this. I mean, I saw some. Oh, so yeah, we'll get to James.
We'll get to it.
But I was reading, because I saw somebody on TikTok, what you were talking about, Truth Seeker, and she had in big letters Galatians 3:10. Let's talk about that verse. Well, I looked it up on Bible Hub, and my husband's Greek. So here he is looking over my shoulder, and where it says that those of you who rely on, now I don't know what anybody else's version, but the ESV says, those of you who rely on the works of the law will be cursed. That's the verse. Well, number one, the word for rely on is I am in Hebrew. In Greek. It's I am. Now, how do they get rely on from I am? And so Mike's looking at it and he's like, it doesn't mean that. And he said the word in Greek, and he's like, and then he used it in a sentence in Greek. Yeah. He goes, I am hungry, and he uses it in that way. And he's like, it means I am. And now he goes in the scripture, it's plural. So it's meaning you are. You are. So it's like, and then works, and then it has this little tiny little word that is a word that means out from or on the outside of. It just means it's ex. It means like exo. Yeah. And he goes, well, they put of in there. They put of in the English. They put of. It doesn't mean of at all. It doesn't mean of. Yeah. And so it means of, it means out or outside of or away from. Yeah. And so it's like, so it says those of you who are outside of the law are cursed.
That changes things.
Yeah. I was like, oh my goodness. The Greek does not say what our English Bibles say. Yeah. So now we also know that works of the law mean it's like more rabbinical. It's the extra stuff that they were adding onto God's commandments. So, but because the very next verse he says that you're cursed for not keeping the law. So how could he say like two different things? Why would he be? Yeah. So look up Galatians 3:10 and
I will. Look it up I'm writing 3:10. Let me write that down. Galatians 3:10.
Look it up in Bible Hub or whatever you like, where you can get songs.
Yeah. The verse that I do like, Truth Seeker, she always says this. She always defines sin, and it's out of 1 John. It's like 1 John 3 something. I can't remember.
Yeah, 3:14 or maybe.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, my daughter. Sorry. Hold on. I don't know how to turn it off. She says, what is sin? And sin is lawlessness. And lawlessness would be not following the law. Yeah, it's not just crazy living, right? It's not just us being wild. It's not following the law. So different. Very different.
It really takes, but you're right. Like you start reading things differently once the Lord reveals things to you. And it's like, and mine were simple things at first that he revealed to me, just different words and what they meant. And I'm like, I've never heard it that way. I didn't know that.
I promise we'll get to it. But like what we were talking about before the show in Acts, where Paul went to pay and take the vow and pay the fee of offering the sacrifice to follow Torah. to follow Torah, right? We've never heard that part in church before.
So you can prove that you are in observance of the law or Torah.
Right.
That's the last, I think it's Acts 21:24. That's the verse, because we were just talking about it. And and it shows that he did the Nazarite vow, not to prove he was still a Jew.
Right.
He did it to prove he was observant to the law.
The commands, right?
I mean, we just like snip it right here. Don't read the rest of the verse.
Right.
Or you mentioned James. We were talking about James. So you mentioned Acts 15. Is that Acts 15 where it talks about the 4 things that the Gentiles?
Yeah, it was Paul. So I'm reading another book. It's called The Theology of Paul, and it's how Paul was a little more liberal in allowing Gentiles to join the assemblies, which he would be because that was his calling. And Peter and some of the other disciples were extremely conservative, and so they believed that they need to convert, they need to follow Torah, they need to and they need to show it before it can be done. They need to be circumcised, all of that. And so when they did the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, it says don't be idolaters, don't be
strangled,
don't eat anything strangled by blood, and there's fornicator, don't be a fornicator, and then everything else you'll learn on Sabbath. Everything else you learn on Sabbath, which
when the law of Moses is taught to you.
Right. So that implies they're still going to be learning Torah, and they're still going to be, we call it sanctification in the church, and we say, become more like Jesus. Well, that process makes us look a lot more Jewish. So they don't mention that part. So
those are things that are very probably more troublesome to some who read it differently. And it probably sounds like we're heretics to some people. Actually my son was telling me about somebody recently who called him a heretic because he believed that I'm his mom, so I'm a teacher. I've taught many different people over the years, both men and women, and he's like, I know you believe your mom can teach because, she's your mom. And so you believe women can teach men. But he goes, that's heretical. He goes, yeah. Wow. It's like, oh, my goodness. But, what do you do?
What do you do?
I'm like, bring him here so I can smack him upside down.
let's just look through a few verses.
All
right. Well, speaking of verses, if you're here this week,
back on track here.
Let's get back on track. This week we are starting the book of James, and so you don't have to go buy a book. I cleaned out my office this week and moved my desk around and filed my books because they've just been in stacks on the floor. I'm like, good Lord, I have to read. I have to start reading some of these. I can't order.
When your 2 reread books are this high.
So you don't have to buy a book. If you have a Bible, any translation, you're welcome to join us. We are going back to Andrew Gabriel Roth's apostolic writings. It's becoming one of my favorite to read. It is just a wonderful translation, and I enjoy his footnotes even as much. So we're going to just do at the beginning of every book, he gives us a really nice introduction to the author, the times, the audience, all of it. So really today we're just going to go through the introduction of James, and if we have time,
maybe some verses in the first chapter if we get to it.
So okay, number 1, here's something that's already a hot topic. His name probably wasn't James, it was probably Jacob, and it was mistranslated. So we have that.
James the Just was what they called him, or Yaakov. What is it?
Yaakov.
Yeah,
like Jacob.
Like that. I know I say it wrong. So he was James the Just to us, but he was Jacob. I don't know why. Do you know the reason why? I heard it was because in the King James Version, he kind of named him after himself. He wanted.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't heard that, but I mean, that
because Jacob is a name. Why would you? I mean, it's used in the Old Testament, so why would you change it?
Why would you? Yeah. And James and Jacob were super common names. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, why would they change it to James when it's nothing to do with James? It's Jacob.
But it's Jacob. Yeah. I don't know.
When we talk about Jacob and Esau, it's written up as Jacob and Esau. He's not called
James. Jacob. Yeah, it says Jacob. So, that's okay. Yeah. They changed Jesus's name, and it was Yeshua. So we don't have the book of Jesus in the Old Testament. if that were really a good translation. Okay, he was a brother of Yeshua. There were at least 4 other boys in the family, and Andrew gave a really good. I mean, he gave all the different family lists, and I'll name a few if you guys want to go and look them up. There's some of his family is mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15:7, Matthew 13:55, Mark 6:3, Mark 15:40, and I think there's a reference to the brother of the master, which is in Galatians 1:19.
And Jude 1. Jude was also
right. Jude, exactly. Yeah. So they think James, and then another brother named Simon, Jude, and then Joseph Jr. they had as well. And even Josephus references James, because this James is the James that would have taken over the Jerusalem council after the crucifixion.
Yeah.
So
he was probably, well, depending on how you look at it, he was either the oldest or the first one born after Jesus, depending on your view.
All right. So you want to explain that? Because we did talk a little bit about that before.
Well, this is extra biblical stuff, but there is extra biblical books or a book that was written by James or Jacob. It's called the Gospel of Jacob, and it's the brother of Jesus, and he actually puts the story out. Or he writes the story from before Yeshua's birth, I should say. And he tells a story between his father and Mary or Miriam. So he basically claims Joseph as his father, and that he, when Mary gave birth, when Mary married Joseph, that he already had 3 children. And he had a wife previously. So he wasn't a young man. He was an older man who, because Mary was actually in the temple and stuff and whatever, but that's a whole nother part of the story. But anyway, so as soon as she got to the age to be on her monthly cycle, she had to be married off. And so they found Joseph who would be willing to take her in and be her husband. So that's what happened. But apparently in Athens, Greece, there's a picture that shows Mary on a donkey with Joseph walking beside her and a young boy leading the donkey. And they think that is James. So that James and the other boys were already born before Jesus, and he would have been the youngest one, not the oldest. So.
Yeah. Which might make it so. I mean, it's we don't know. We don't know. It is
what happened in that time period with she being so young and he was older. It would have been feasible that he had already had family, because he dies at some point before Jesus even so he probably was much older.
Right. So the point is, we mentioned all of that because the point is, Jesus likely did not. So the tradition was the oldest son or the firstborn son would go to Jerusalem and they would spend time with the rabbis and they would begin their Torah studies.
Yeah.
And there's evidence even within the Bible that Jesus didn't do that. Now, Andrew says because he's the Word and he knows Torah better than everybody.
Yeah, they said, well, he didn't need it to do it because they realized he knew it all already.
Right. But there's also references in the scriptures that says, who is this guy? How does he know so much? And they were amazed by the knowledge. Like when he was 12 and he was sitting and talking with them, if he had been in Jerusalem studying with them, they would have known exactly who he was. But the Pharisees are saying, who is this guy? Who is this kid? Who is this? He speaks better with more authority than the rest of us.
So, but it says about James that he writes that James did have a Torah education.
Right.
Because it's very clear from his writings that he was trained in the Torah.
Exactly. So that's one of the reasons why, James takes over. I don't know if he was assigned or voted on or Yeshua. There's some references of Yeshua kind of telling Peter, I would like James to take over. We don't have that conversation.
It just says that he gives like Luke 24:34, 1 Corinthians 15:5. And I did have, if you want me to read, I do have 1 Corinthians 15:5 marked in here. I thought I had it marked. Maybe I don't. That was Galatians. But it was interesting because it does mention in Corinthians, I won't read it then, but that he appeared to several people and his brother Jacob was one that he appeared to that's in 1 Corinthians 15:7.
Okay.
So, but it's interesting because I think that, and so then down here it says once converted, like that his sibling, like Yeshua, probably came to him. And that's actually what's in the book, the extra biblical writings of James. But that Jesus, once he resurrected, he came to him and said, because if you think about it, go back to the cross, because this always I always wondered why, when he had brothers, did he leave his mother
to John?
To another disciple, saying, here, you're going to be her son now. If he had brothers that she gave birth to, why would they reject their own mother that'd be so against the Torah to reject your mother. That's one of the 5 commandments. First,
honor your father and mother. They
would never reject their mother, not take care of her, so to the point that he had to give her to one of his disciples to take care of. So the story goes is that when he arose, when he resurrected, he came and said, take care of my mother. That's what he was written in this book. He goes, take care of my mother, and so it was like kind of, that was always troubling to me. Why wouldn't they? Because she hadn't done anything wrong. It was him they were.
They had the beef with.
It was him. I mean, it even says, among other things, tried to have him locked up as a crazy person, and that's.
I know. And I thought there's a good footnote in there, and I mentioned it before, that the reference to when Yeshua says 3 will be against 2 and 2 will be against 3.
That's right there.
That he tends to Andrew believes it's probably a reference to his family, because two, which would be James and another, Jude, ultimately believed in him, but the rest of the family thought he was crazy, wanted to lock him up, which I thought was interesting, because you've always hear there's all kinds of extra biblical that the boy Jesus performed miracles. I mean, it's all part of extra biblical things, and people wonder, like, wouldn't the boy Jesus know about have power and that kind of thing? And to me, for him to have a statement of the family wants to lock him up tells me that no, he kept it under control. He didn't reveal himself until it truly was time to reveal himself.
I agree with you, because if he were, I don't think he did any of it until his ministry started. Actually,
I don't think he was turning water into wine at home, to prove anything. So
I agree, and so it's putting the whole Bible together.
It is,
and it's really taking, because looking at different things and thinking, well, why did he do this? Why did he do this? Why didn't he do that? Why is there nothing before he turned 30? Basically, because he wasn't doing anything unusual.
Well, and also they couldn't become rabbis until they were 30.
Right.
So
but it was once he started his ministry, right?
Yeah, I mean, everybody
started. So he's just a normal, between infancy and 29, he was just a normal guy.
Just a normal guy. Yeah.
Other than 12 when we're told. But I think that's the only other thing, because I think there would be more about him in the Bible if he had done anything else significant before that time.
Sure. I agree. All right. Well, what else? Okay. So James is writing to Jewish believers who are scattered, who are not in Jerusalem. James would have been based out of Jerusalem, but
he's writing to the dispersed,
right?
Which also gives us a clue that these are the dispersed of the northern tribes of Israel who live among the Gentiles. So he could possibly be writing them among other.
And we know that Paul and Peter did a lot of the missionary work, in and out of Jerusalem. They were the ones that were really going out and proselytizing. So for James to follow up and write letters to them, and they could have been letters of introduction, these guys are coming, or it could have been a follow-up from checking on the churches that were planted. So and they also believe, and I thought this was interesting, this is the kind of stuff that I enjoy. He thinks that the book was probably written no later than 48 AD, because of the word assembly versus church.
Yeah, I have that all highlighted, of course. But one thing I found, it was 44 AD when it was written. And what's interesting, it puts it as the first book of the New Testament written.
See, when I was in seminary, they always said Mark was the first book written.
Yeah, I've heard that. But
it was always Mark, but I don't think Andrew says it was the first.
He says it. Yeah, he says that it was he doesn't come out and say, but he says that James and Matthew were contemporaries. They wrote
he did say that.
At the same time. But another source that I checked, when it puts all the books of the Bible in chronological order. And it has James actually being written at the same time as like Nehemiah was written and as Esther. So it was being written around, it was, so like those books were written late. They were historical books. And then James was being written around that time too. So that's just, I thought it was interesting because I didn't realize, like, Nehemiah, Esther were all written around the same, and James were all written in like the same decade almost.
Interesting. I always think, because the events of Nehemiah would have been way before James.
They would have been, but it wasn't written
down. It would have been written down later. That makes sense. Although, what was canonized in the Old Testament? Because I'm curious about that. Would Esther and Nehemiah not have been canonized? Because the Old Testament was canonized by the time of Christ.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I'm going to have to do some research.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe my source is wrong, but it did have James in the right place. I mean, it had him around 44, which he's saying it can't be past 48 because of what you brought up. But go ahead and start, because this was really cool. And he talks about Galatians, and I actually had that marked, not the other one. So
well, go ahead. What was the point you were going to say? Go for it.
So what you started was about the letter that in Galatians, when Paul wrote, he uses the term assembly, which is not ecclesia. What is it?
Ecclesia.
Yeah, ecclesia. Boy, I messed that up terribly.
Yeah,
I knew I would, because I'm like, I have to always think about it. But ecclesia means more like congregation, but he actually used a different word, or a different word was used in Greek, because I kind of believe, I mean, Paul may have written Greek, but I think he could have even had it translated from his Aramaic, because I don't know, but there's some that say that he wrote in Aramaic and then had like Luke translated into Greek.
I mean, that would make sense. So the point we're trying to make here is the word church isn't really even in the original writings, like, because I hope everybody understands.
Until like 60 AD, did they start using church?
Well, they start saying assembly. They start using assembly, and then the word assembly gets flipped in Greek to church.
Right.
But prior to 60 AD, they were just saying synagogue, the synagogue, the synagogue. So, and that's one of the things they use to date things, because, after a certain, I think it was the destruction of the temple, they ultimately ended up just saying the assembly, assembly. So I thought,
they used the word synagogue in some, because it says, since Paul writes Galatians in 48 CE, the use of the original term for synagogue is pointing to an earlier period. So he actually used the word synagogue. He didn't use the word church, but and we see that in Acts. We see that often the word synagogue is used in Acts.
So. Yeah. Interesting stuff. All right. Well, I don't want to get too far ahead. I'm sure there's some other things you want to add, but ultimately James died. He was murdered by stoning. He was stoned by a high priest. So I think that's interesting too. So he knocking things over.
Yeah. I mean, it just shows that they were, because they chose to follow Messiah, Yeshua as the Messiah. I mean, it was never popular. It wasn't popular, and you were put to death. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I think that we just think, I heard somebody today think that, do you really think as Americans, we think it's so easy? And do you think it's always going to be easy to follow and there's never going to be any persecution in your life? Because as we get closer to the end times, because again, another touchy subject, but not everyone believes in a pre-trib
rapture, right?
And so, and I'm personally more like pre-wrath, but there are those who aren't even pre-wrath who feel like you will have to go through some of that,
right? And there's so many Bible verses that say, those who make it to the end, and those, to the end. So
to the end of what?
The end of what? The end of the good times? I don't know. I don't think so. And I don't think, if we are truly grafted into Israel, we cannot be so arrogant to think that we would not have suffering just as much as Israel did. Right. So I think there's so many within the church that don't even have it correct, that there's got to be a sifting of those too.
The wheat and tares.
The wheat and
tares. I mean, they're going to be separated, and people are going to be the goats and the sheep.
Goats, right? The sheep and goats. Yeah,
they're going to be separation. There will.
Well, I was even reading in I want to say in Matthew, and there's so much, how the messengers will come and separate. I mean, it says it multiple times, and the messengers are the angels, so if they're going to come for the harvest, right? Because that tends to be what we think instead of a rapture. It's
and harvest isn't mentioned till Revelation 14.
Right.
The harvest.
Right. So there's so many references to separating out. So we'll see what happens. It could be later.
I mean, and I think, but the sad thing is I think that will cause people's faith to crumble.
I think so too, because if you have built your entire existence, to become a whole Bible believer and to think for a moment that perhaps Torah has something to do even with your faith in Yeshua, right? Then your entire belief system is being challenged. And so put that on top of difficulties you're going to have in life, I'm sure people are going to question their faith.
And that's an excellent point, because that is exactly how the Pharisees felt.
Yeah.
Their whole belief system was being challenged.
Yeah.
And what did they do? They fought back, and they killed anybody who followed something other than what they taught.
Yes, they did.
Why wouldn't that be consistent with today? I mean, as I'm reading through Romans 1, I'm teaching on it tomorrow, and it's like, you know, why does God give them over to, you know, that word, give them over, or hand them over, or abandon? That's actually means like a judge gives a criminal to a bailiff and said, here, lock them up.
Right.
That's what he's telling them. Let their sin lock them up, because, you know, I mean, and the Lord did do that. He gave them over to their sin. He gave them over to their reprobate mind or something like that, you know? So they made the choices. And I think that we're coming to a time in our future where we all will have to make choices. Who we're going to follow, who we're going to be faithful.
I think that's a real good transition into James 1. It's not a very long chapter, but he says, James 1:4, now let patience have its perfect work, so that you may have mastery through repetition, to be perfect and complete, that you may lack nothing. Now, if any of you lacks heavenly wisdom, choma, then let him ask it of Elohim, who gives it to you freely and reproaches no one, and it will be given to him. And let him ask in faith, while not doubting, for he who doubts is like the waves of the sea, winds that stir it up. You know, I think I'm not a combative person. So when I get challenged a lot, and I said this earlier before we went online, you know, I love to share my faith, and I love to share the things that I'm learning in the Bible and word studies and all that. But when people start coming at me with, like, you know, the theology of the church, I'd rather just delete the whole thing and just move along instead of getting into a big debate with them. And my biggest response is, you know, I really pray that you would go back to God's word and just remove everything you've ever learned from the church and just read it for yourself.
Yeah.
Ask for wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. Because we are so trained to listen to the man at the pulpit.
Yeah.
And take in everything he says, and then ask him, you know, you don't disagree with your pastor. I mean, I actually learned that the hard way.
Right.
And so you don't disagree, you just listen, and you just do what they tell you to do, and you believe it the way they tell you to believe it. And for that reason, I mean, I had a hard time being able to teach anything, because I didn't agree with everything he said. And not just him, but, you know, different pastors. I was never one just to like, okay, he said it, I better write that down and never forget it. And this is how I have to believe it. But I think we've become so trained to just listen to what the pastor says and how he tells you to understand it, that we don't think for ourselves, and we don't read for ourselves and actually listen to the one who wrote it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's like asking you, what did you mean by this in your book? Or asking me, what did she mean by that in her book? I mean, that's what we do. We go through somebody else.
Yeah. And I do the same thing too, because there are so many differences, even within the Messianic believing community. You know, some believe Gentiles follow the law. Some believe Gentiles do not follow the law. Some believe, you know, certain Torah observance applies to this and applies that. And so whenever I get confused and I really struggle with it, and you know, I pray about it often, because if I'm wrong, I'm happily correct me, you know. But my number one response is go read it. Just go read it. Go read it for yourself and determine, you know, go listen to their argument, look up the verses that they're saying. So I'm feverishly writing down verses, and go look those things up, pray about it, and read it for yourself, and go from there.
Yeah, and that he's our teacher. Let him teach you. Let him correct you, like you said. I mean, that's the most important thing. Because we don't know it all, and neither does our pastor.
No,
and neither does our rabbi. Whoever you follow, they don't know it all. And I don't agree with every rabbi I listen to any more than I agree with every pastor I listen to.
Exactly.
So I don't agree with every book I read. I ask the Lord, is this right? Is this wrong? You know? It doesn't line up with the scriptures you've taught me.
Right.
It doesn't line up with what you've revealed to me.
Right. So all that to say, I think we're going to be challenged a little bit in James, because there's a great debate with the book of James that people sometimes get stuck on. And if you are Torah observant and you do believe that Torah does not save you, but it gives you the opportunity to show your obedience. It's almost like, everybody gets kicked, like be baptized. That's how you show that you're a believer. Well, how about follow Torah? And maybe that's how you can show that you're a believer.
And, and why were people considered unclean?
Yeah.
I mean, they were unclean because of what they did, what they touched, what they worshiped. Mm-hmm. Even what they ate. Mm-hmm. Because why wouldn't Jews eat with Gentiles? Because of what they ate. They knew it was unclean. They wouldn't eat. And we twist so many things, and we have, and most of it's because even our pastors have been taught incorrectly, but it's all about being unclean. And that's why things like even Yom Kippur had to happen, because it was a way, not just the Day of Atonement, but it was also atoning the temple.
It was a reset.
Because, people made it filthy.
Right.
Human beings made it dirty. Right. So every year the blood had to be sprinkled on everything. Mm-hmm. The blood of the goats had to be sprinkled on everything to atone it and purify it again. Mm-hmm. And we're the temple. Mm-hmm. So if we're the temple of the Spirit of God,
guess what? We get pretty dirty.
Yeah. He wants us to be clean.
Right.
That's not rocket science. He wants us to be clean.
Right.
Both physically,
spiritually,
not physically in the sense of
morally,
you're dirty or sinning.
Yeah.
But clean in what we do, clean in what our mouth says, and I hear people talk about scripture and they're cursing out one side of the mouth, talk about scripture on this side. Mm-hmm. And it's like, where is that biblical? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We just have such dirty mouths and dirty humor, and I'm talking about people in the church. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about non-believers, because that you expect.
Right. Interesting.
But yeah.
All right.
Every area of our life needs to be clean according to God's word.
It does. All right. Anything else in the introduction that you wanted to touch on?
Not really. I think that I think we covered everything that I had highlighted too. So okay. Yeah. And even the notes I had, you started reading parts of Jacob 1, and you stopped right at 7, at the end of 7, but it says, and let not that man expect to receive anything of Maryah, which is actually the Aramaic way of saying
master,
the father. Mm-hmm. The master, who is divided in his mind and unstable in all his ways.
Right.
So if you're divided in your mind, meaning that you don't even know what you believe, and you can't even, I don't know. He gives the example that you look in the mirror and all of that, and you don't remember what you look like after looking in the mirror. But he's talking about faith and doubting, and that's a division. Having faith and doubting is a division of your mind. It's like you can't do both. If you have faith, you can't doubt. It's not that we don't. We all do, right? I know everybody does. And my husband and I were even talking about this earlier today, because it was like every time he starts to worry about something, and then the Lord makes it happen, and he's just like, I don't know why I worry, because the Lord always comes through. He always comes through. And yet I'm so easily drawn to worry first before I just wait to see what he's going to do. And but that can be all of us, obviously. But it's that division. That's actually what he's talking about. And he goes at the bottom on the notes. It says the phrase is literally divided in mind, means to doubt or be uncertain. And as Yeshua said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. So too, a mind that is divided or is hopping in between opinions as Eloku is said, or the Lord said, is unstable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there was any more to that. No. So yeah, and then I thought all this was very interesting to read it in this version. I thought it was to read it this way, like even starting in 9. Let the humble brother rejoice in his elevation, and the rich in his humility.
Yeah.
Because, and he just goes on, because like a flower of an herb, likewise, he passes away. Everything passes away, and you can't take it with you.
Okay, we'll keep going, because this is a little bit of what we're talking about. Go down to verse 12. Blessed is the man who endures trials, so that when he is examined, he may receive the crown of life, which Elohim promised to those who loves. Even that, we run over that and we think, oh, okay, well, we're going to have trials and we might have some difficulties, but we have not had trials, we've had bad days. We've had some struggles.
Bad things happen. Yeah, bad things happen. Yeah, people die. There are horrible accidents. Yes. But I because there have been a few people stories of people losing their little toddlers and drowning, and it's very, very sad. And that's not the work of the Lord. That's life. That's right. Living here on this earth.
Right.
But that is a trial, because a lot of people will lose their faith when something like that happens.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an opportunity to lose our faith. That's a trial. And I don't mean this the way it's probably going to sound, because I don't think the Lord allows it to happen, but he uses it.
Yeah.
Now I shouldn't even say that, because he has to allow things, but he'll then turn around and use it to see where you are. Is your faith really strong? Are you going to depend on him to get through it? Not saying anybody shouldn't grieve and wail and cry over something like that.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't mean you don't grieve and get it all out.
So I'm going to read the rest of it, because I think it kind of applies to what you're saying. It says, "No, let no one, when he's tempted, say, I'm tempted by Elohim, for Elohim is not tempted with evil, nor does he tempt any man." Okay, I've always been taught, God's not going to tempt you to sin. But I think what you're talking about, how when we do face these trials, it's an opportunity to lean in and to not lose our faith. We're very tempted. We're tempted to pitch it. We're tempted to turn our back on God. But I think that kind of plays into it. He's not allowing these things happen. He's not going to, he wants these things to be used for his glory, which sounds horrible. Like, how is the death of a child or something for his glory? But that it's not a temptation to pitch our faith, but it's an opportunity to acknowledge, I'm at a crossroads here. I can absolutely pitch my faith, or I can lean in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And even the word, I went back and I wrote myself a note in the Lord's Prayer, lead us not into temptation.
Right.
That word should not be temptation. Exactly. That's an American type of, English type of translation. It's tested.
Yeah.
We can ask the Lord not to test us.
Right.
But I think this might be, I wonder if this is the same thing. So let no one, when he is tempted, say, I am tempted by the Lord. But he doesn't tempt, but he tests us.
Yeah.
And he can use anything, even the loss of a loved one, to test us. And not that we like it, but it's what he does. And but I wanted to share this story. I gave my mom's eulogy. I don't know if I told you that. Yeah. But and as I was thinking about it, my dad died over 33 years ago. And my brother died right after I was born. So he died at 10. And so I was born in September. He died in November at 10 years old. And for most of my life, especially once I was an adult, my mom would lament over these things, and she would say, why did he take my son? Why did he take my husband? Or why did he allow my husband? Because my dad had a stroke when I was 6. So here my mom went in from loss to now my father having a serious stroke, which made it so that he could no longer work.
Right.
And so she always asked why. So as I was thinking about what I wanted to say, the Lord just dropped something in my mind. And because my mom was a young woman. She was 20 when she married my dad, and she had high hopes of their life and what it would be like. And all that just came crashing down. It wasn't at all what she wanted. And I thought, that is how we usually react when bad things happen. Of course, it's easy to be selfish. Like, why me? Why me, Lord? But what the Lord dropped into my mind while I was preparing for what I was going to say was, I didn't give your dad to your mom to make her life easy and just pleasant all the time. He goes, I gave your mom to your dad, knowing what was going to happen. Sorry.
Yeah, that he would need her so much.
He needed a woman who could take care of him and sit by his side. And even when things got rough. So that they were put together for that reason.
Right.
And sometimes we don't see that. We don't see the other side of why am I here? Why is this happening to me? Maybe it's to help somebody else.
Right. My husband and I have had those conversations, like, because he's lost his job 3 different times, and we've moved across countries in pursuit of jobs, and why didn't we get that job? And we've also often just kind of thought, well, we're waiting because there's got to be something that's got to be put together there, so that when we get there, it'll fall into place, and so we've kind of mused along those lines, wondering what's being planned, why this job, why not that job. So
sorry, I didn't think I was going to get
I think it is beautiful, because we always think, why me, like, well, why not you? It sounds like she was the perfect person for him. And
she was strong.
Not many people have that strength and dedication.
And even when people told her to leave him, even Social Security said you should divorce him because you can get more money if you divorce him. She was like, why would I do that? She stuck with them. And so exactly. I mean, he doesn't test us to hurt us. He tests us to see what we're made of, to see how strong our faith is.
Right.
But sometimes he lets bad things happen so that we can help the next person who had bad things happen to them.
And I think too, there's another half of it. It says, but each is tempted by his own pleasure, and lust is drawn away. And I think that's important, because everybody says, I would turn away from sin. I can do, but Satan is testing us, or tempting us with something that we want.
Yeah, he knows our desires. He
knows our desire. And if we do get pulled into that, that is a wonderful, then, nobody wants to go through anything like, a bad thing. But then when you get to the other end, you're like, now I know what will pull me away, right? Like, you're aware of your weaknesses. And so that's good. I think that's good, to be aware of where your weaknesses are and to guard your heart, for whatever that is. So I think even within that, there's good that can come from it.
Yeah. And I mean, as you read in verse 3, the trial of your faith makes you possess patience, right?
Yeah.
And now let patience have its perfect work, so that you will have mastery through repetition to be perfect and complete, so that you lack nothing. So repetition's no fun, but sometimes if you find yourself going through the same thing over and over, it's repetition until you get what he's trying to teach you.
Right. Well, and I mean, as a teacher, repetition's a beautiful thing because we practice it over and over and it becomes muscle memory. And
exactly. Sure. And it's the same, whether you're learning a new language, whether you're learning the piano, or whether you're learning grammar. I mean, it's repetition is how you learn.
So here's a great verse. Every perfect gift comes down from above, from the Father of heavenly of lights. With him, there is no changing, not even a shadow of change. And what I do now when I read the New Testament, I look for verses that confirm Torah. And this is one of them. Like, Father Yah does not change. He does nothing. He's unchanging. There's so many verses in the Bible that talk about how he does not change. So you can't tell me he suddenly says, oh, by the way, you can eat meat. You can eat pigs now.
Yeah. So, and he says it twice, whom there is no changing, not even a shadow of change.
Right. So I
think it's an emphasis on, no change whatsoever.
No change. We only have a few more minutes, but I did want to go down to 25. But everyone that looks upon the perfect Torah of freedom and lives fully in it is not a hearer of something to be forgotten, but a doer of good things, and he will be blessed by his works. And I loved it. I want to read his note. I think we have just a minute. It says,
is that verse 25? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Verse 25. It says, the Torah of perfect freedom. Yeshua said in John 8:36, if the Son of Man makes you free, you are free indeed. And as a result, the Torah of perfect freedom, as James is describing here, combines the righteous aspiration of the 5 books of Moses and the freedom that comes from having our sins forgiven through Messiah, which was well predicted in Torah as far back as Genesis 3:15. Paul himself says in Galatians 3:22, which is written about the same time as this epistle, the scripture has encircled all things under sin, meaning that Torah sets the boundaries for what is righteous and wicked behavior. And when we give ourselves the best effort to keep Torah, even then we're going to fail to do so. Yeshua forgives our sin and bridges our imperfections into perfection from the other side. The result is perfect freedom in keeping the Torah and being made free by Messiah. So
good.
Again, it's not that I don't have to keep Torah, or it's not that I am keeping Torah for salvation, but we really begin to understand how it all just fits together.
Yeah, and the Holy Spirit was given so we can keep Torah, and grace was given for when we break Torah.
We're going to, We're going to need a reset. And look at that. Our time is up. We are out of time. Yeah. So thank you. Come back and we will begin. We're going to start with James 2 next week. So we'll probably do a couple of chapters because they're not that long.
James 2 isn't very long, but none of them are, but it's also very short book.
Yeah, it's a short book. All right. Well, thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Have a great evening.
Shabbat Shalom.
If you missed today's show and want to watch it again or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lambnetwork.tv, where you will find this show and all of the other live Lamb show archives on the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the lambnetwork.tv website. I'm Stephanie Pavlantos, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.